to also bring in Charles Lister, a senior fellow resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. He focuses on terrorism, insurgency, and sub-state security threats across the Middle East. I just want to start off by asking you, what exactly now, the same question that I just asked Jessica, if this was a test of this young administration, the Trump administration, President Trump has sent his own message back to Bashar al-Assad with the launching of these missiles, these 50 Tomahawk missiles into Syria. What are the options available to President Assad at this point?
Well, I think what your previous guest, or I think Jessica said, is basically right. President Assad's options are extremely limited at this point. I think what he will be doing is, if not what he will already have been doing earlier today, is speaking fairly urgently with the Russians and trying to figure out what his other options might be going forward. I imagine what we'll start to see from tomorrow morning is a slightly more constructive language from the Russian government on a political level, although, of course, we will expect them to be pushing back on the military level. I think what's interesting about the targeting of the Al-Shayrat air base, which, as far as I'm aware, is the only target at the moment that has been attacked tonight, is that it's almost certain that there would have been Russian military personnel at that facility in the very recent past, if not at least earlier today. It would be extremely surprising to me if the U.S. government had not given Russia prior warning that this attack was going to take place. So I expect we will have taken those kinds of prior actions to ensure that this wasn't perceived as an attack against the Russians, but that very specifically this was a punitive measure targeted against the Assad regime for this chemical attack that we saw on Tuesday, and specifically that this was to reinforce the international norm that it's simply unacceptable to use chemical weapons in this modern world that we live in, but also secondarily to force President Bashar al-Assad to basically come back to the table and play ball. The international community has been placing significantly heavy resources into the political process over the last 12 months or so, but repeatedly it's actually been the Assad regime that has spoiled those efforts. I would be very surprised if that wasn't a part of the strategic calculus here, even though, of course, in the immediate term, this is to reinforce the chemical weapons norm that I mentioned first.
Charles, you talk about Russia. Earlier today, a British diplomat who works at the United Nations said there was supposed to be a vote on Russia, a resolution taking place. That vote was delayed. We all know that it would be highly unlikely that Russia would support any sort of efforts against Syria at this point. They're backing Syria. You talk about how it's likely that the Russians got some sort of heads up. Today they warned the United States that if there could be negative consequences if Washington takes military action against Syria. What might those negative consequences be, Charles?
Well, the Russians have got certain options on their table. I mean, one of them is, of course, to try and spoil the United States' efforts to take back Raqqa from ISIS. There's been, in a sense, a race for Raqqa between pro-Assad forces backed by Russia and Iran and between U.S.-backed forces, predominantly the Kurdish YPG and its broader Syrian Democratic Forces coalition. It's quite possible we could see Russia trying to accelerate the pro-regime move towards Raqqa in a way as forcing the issue from the United States. Other than that, Russia doesn't have a huge amount of other options that would be logical. Of course, some people will say, well, Russia can start to, directly intensify its attacks on the U.S.-backed or U.S.-vetted opposition forces. I think that's possible, although I think it would actually backfire in terms of Russia's broader strategic interests. Broadly speaking, this is a big test for the theory that escalating certain dynamics within the Syrian conflict will then de-escalate the broader strategic dynamic. And I think we're really going to have to wait to see over the next few days exactly how that plays out. In many respects, of course, clearly Russia is a significant dynamic here. I would actually argue Iran is even more significant. Iran has many, many options on the table in terms of how it will be able to push back against this. Fundamentally speaking, for Iran, the existence and the survival of the Assad regime is zero-sum. It is an existentially important issue for Tehran. For Russia, it's a strategic interest. For Iran, it's everything. And I think this is most certainly where we will see Iran over the next few weeks determinedly start to push back against any further attempts by the United States to exert more influence, not just on the military dynamic, not just on constraining the Assad regime's options, but also, for example, in spoiling any attempts to push the political process forward, in spoiling any potential attempts to push forward the offensives against ISIS, whether that be in eastern Syria or in Raqqa or elsewhere, even next door in Iraq. I would actually expect the more aggressive reaction to come from Iran, although it may take us a few days, if not several weeks, for us to really see that take place.